and we will get YouTube here, and we're going to get our little link, and we're going to share it here on That's Good Shift. Hello world! And we're going to post that on Facebook. And now anybody who goes on our Facebook and sees, well, my goodness, Facebook really wants me to sign up for something. I don't know. But hey, we're there. We're live, and anybody who clicks that, Facebook really wants will to go and see us on YouTube. So YouTube is where everybody can interact with us. And hello world, I'm Marshall, and this is
Alexis.
Hey everybody. Alexis and I are a couple of apparently insane individuals, but I think that's a good thing. Who's sane, really? What is sanity? And we had this idea, let's do a podcast. And then I think all of our critical thinking stopped because we descended into, well, how do we stream it? How do we make it work? How do we get this integration to work? And all of that. Amusing, but yeah, the thing is, Alexis has a lot of amazing ideas. I have an okay idea every now and then, and we thought maybe we'd like to share some of this with you folks out there, and maybe you'd like to ask us questions and get some perspective. And I know I'm hogging up the microphone right now. I'm going to pass to Alexis in just a minute, but since this is our first kind of formal broadcast, I just want to say, look, we're ordinary folks, but I believe that there is something extraordinary in every ordinary person out there. And every time I encounter a person, whether they're sneezing their guts out or, interacting with us on YouTube or Facebook or wherever, I want to find those hidden gems. And I want to take these ordinary things that are around us and I want to reframe them and shift some of our perspective on the world and the things that are in it and give us kind of new perspectives that really kind of brighten and enhance our outlook and add value to our lives. And that's why we call the show That's Good Shift. Alexis, I guess it's your turn. Here's the talking stick. You can have it.
I just wanted to, have a little time to chat with Marshall about interesting things and thought it would be fun. Um, so today we were trying to figure out what we are going to talk about, and I have been reading this book, Celtic Myth and Religion, and it's a fascinating book that talks about it's kind of like the first book that's really put together all the things into one place and kind of organized it into a cohesive piece, really. It's by this Harvard professor, and it's basically like reading a graduate course in a book. But one of the things that she says is that really Celtic traditions are much more culturally significant than Roman or Greek. Because when she's talking about Celtic, she's talking about Gaul, Celtic Gaul, and Celtic Britannia. So she's talking about basically all the space that was influenced by Druidic thought and all of these philosophies and theologies and cosmologies and all these different ways of viewing the world. And you can even see that in some of the temples and different things that are still standing today, that they're actually Roman and Gaul
Hmm.
on the continent. There's a lot of stuff like that. And we even continue to have like rivers that are named after Gaulish and Celtic deities. So it's kind of an interesting it's an interesting argument, and certainly it's an argument that I think is worth considering, but it also kind of is a reframing of like how you would orient, like how do we think about that? Like at least when I was growing up, I don't know about you, Marshall, in your, education, they really push Rome,
Yeah,
they really push
yeah.
Greece and all these different ideas. And like Gaul is like a footnote. Like it's not even mentioned.
Yeah, it was something
So
that Caesar conquered. I came, I saw, I conquered, and then that is it. That is all you get for Gaul.
Well, and part of that is the oral history is it was emphasized in that tradition a little bit more than um was in Roman, right? So like in Rome, you were expected to write things down, but in Druid circles, in Bardic circles, you're talking about people who their memories are prized, and they would spend 20 years perfecting their memory palaces, perfecting their ability to trace divine genealogies and chieftains and all of these different things. And so there was a big push against writing things down. And because we don't have that native writing, we have whatever other people said. And so
Yeah.
the people who were talking about it were Rome and Greece. And then later, actually, the most intact pieces were from Ireland, from monks. There was actually
Yes.
which is crazy, right? Like there was like Saint Columba actually saved the Bardic Order in Ireland. And by doing that, he preserved all of this information that we would have lost. It's crazy pants. Like, it just kind of brings it just drives the point home, like, you need to write this stuff down. You probably need to write things down.
Well, what people, I don't think people know it, but what happened was, hey, I'm playing with the views here on Discord, so I apologize if you see things switch back and forth there. We're kind of getting our sea legs. Um, People don't realize that when the rest of Europe was in a state of collapse, the fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 AD, and what a lot of people like to call the Dark Ages, which is kind of a misnomer, but whatever. Technically, a Dark Age for historians is a period in which there's no written record. That's why they call it a Dark Age, because we can't quite understand it. That would be like from 1200 BC to 600 BC in ancient Greece was a Dark Age. But anyway, I digress. So while the rest of Europe was kind of trying to pull itself out of the ashes and rubble of the collapsed Roman Empire, Ireland was flourishing. And they had this strong monastic culture. Like they built all these
Mhm.
monasteries, and they were writing and they were copying down everything they could find, including works of classic literature from the Greeks and the Romans. Heck, half of the reason we have the Greek and Roman literature we have is thanks to the Irish monasteries. And then when the Black Death swept through Europe from 1347 to 1354, Ireland was relatively untouched, and so the rest of Europe kind of got wiped out. And again, you have this period of kind of bleakness and darkness, and people are look, the last thing people want to do is copy books while everyone's dying from the plague. And Ireland is just kind of, trucking along, moving along, moving along. And I think the great tragedy for Irish history is that the English kind of moved in and kind of set up camp. And over time, particularly by the time of Henry and Elizabeth, they really started to strangle indigenous Irish culture and civilization and impose their own worldview and their own way of doing things. And of course, that's sort of the worldview that is still dominant around the world today. It's this Eurocentric, and it's this kind of this British centric view of the world and civilization. And the Irish just kind of like the people of Gaul, like the Celts, they get regulated to kind of a footnote. And I think now, as historians challenge a lot of these conceits, we're starting to learn that hey, maybe some of this isn't right. Maybe the history isn't very fair, and it's time to challenge it.
Well, and I think, I mean, that's certainly one of the things that is problematic because I mean like you just said like Irish and then Celt, but when we talk about Celtic stuff, we're talking about like Celtic Britannia, so that would
Mm-hmm.
be including
It's a
Scotland,
whole
Wales,
region.
and
Yeah.
Ireland, and then also the continent, which would be Celtic Gaul. So
Mm-hmm.
they're these people were, even though they were very tribal, these are like OG white tribes. But they were connected and they had relationships between the tribes and they were relatively peaceful. I mean, yes, they had raiding parties and all that stuff because they were, tribes and
Yeah,
people want like things that other
yeah.
people have. But they would get together, they would have like there was a rhythm of the year where during the colder, darker time, they would basically have parties together and just like hang out and feast and do whatever. But what you were saying about, overwriting a lot of what indigenous and native understandings of the world, I feel that it's really hard, especially when you look at Britain, because the UK, England in particular, did such a number on the world. And they did that
Yeah.
but they kind of perfected that at home first.
Yeah.
They did
Yes, they
that with
did.
Scotland
And
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 with
Wales
Wales.
and Ireland and yeah.
And but even more so with Scotland, because in some ways Ireland was still very much itself. It still was asserting itself. Scotland, because of the connection between Mary and Elizabeth and James,
Hmm.
Scotland kind of was subsumed, and so parts of Scotland were systematically destroyed over time. I mean,
Hmm.
like that's why we have such fierce independence in Appalachia and why
Hmm.
plaid is really popular. It's because
Yeah.
where do you think that came from? That's your Jacobin roots, y'all. Like
Right.
it's like that's for real. That desire to be in the hills and desire to be fiercely independent, to have choice, to assert oneself. Those are all things that are inherently part of Scottish history that were imported because there was nowhere else to go.
Hmm.
Those people were being murdered
Yeah.
in a really public way because they fought back and England didn't want to deal with that. And so they put them down. So, and along with that, a lot of the language, the cultural stuff. I mean, in some ways, like, yeah, in Ireland, you had Christianity, like, take over a lot of things. Like, for example, we just had February 1st, which is Candlemas
Hmm.
in the Catholic Church. That would be St. Bridget's feast day. But it's also historically a celebration of the beginning of spring happening
Hmm.
in bulk. So that would be like, okay, we're having our first milks, we're turning over some soil the first time. And so these kinds of traditions got overwritten in a few different ways, both violently, but
Hmm.
also in a more kind of peaceable way to kind of like, okay, well, you can have your little parties, but we're going to just rename that. And instead of
Hmm.
you having a goddess, we'll just have a saint and
Right.
we'll just rewrite the story of these people.
Right.
And then you can keep on, celebrating Saint Bridget. But
And you wonder what gets lost when that happens. It
yeah,
seems like the world and the history of the world is kind of, it's written on a disk drive, and there's always somebody writing over it. It's like your computer hard drive, and there's always somebody putting new data on top of the old, and over time the old data kind of gets erased or corrupted or lost. But then you have some of these specialists who really understand, and they go back in time and they find these fragments of old data on that hard drive, and they try to make a coherent picture, and they can't. They only get fragments, but what they see is sometimes very tantalizing, and it suggests that what we're being told about the world and why it is the way that it is and how it should be, sometimes it doesn't add up. There's powerful people out there, and they have agendas, and they've always been there throughout every generation, throughout history, and they are the
yeah,
ones who are constantly trying to rewrite the past. Because as they say in the book 1984, he who controls the past controls the present, and who controls the present controls the future. Or no, it's controls the present, controls the past, controls the
Yeah.
future. And
Yeah,
that's
totally.
that's the thing. And I think what I would encourage people to do, I think my kind of good shift out of this is we really need to challenge a lot of these deep rooted assumptions that we have about the world, and we have to challenge established narratives. And we
Well,
have, there's other perspectives out there.
well, and I think that this goes to a lot of things that are happening right here, at home. We're talking about a time when a lot of people are really upset about hearing that this story that we were telling ourselves was not real, that it was
Hmm.
not accurate, that there were other ways of seeing it, that there were other stories that need to be heard. We can see that there's a long history of that with Native peoples in the Americas,
Hmm.
and we have a long way to go with that.
Yeah,
So long.
yeah. Well,
And of course, there's also with African Americans, we have a long way to go with that.
yeah,
But people, being uncomfortable with this idea of there were different stories. There were different ways of telling these stories. There's different people that their voices are worth hearing and their perspectives are worth hearing. And there's more than two ways to skin a cat. I
I wouldn't
I
know
mean,
about that,
seriously.
but
I'm just here for that like dark little goth edge, okay, y'all? Like that's what I'm doing.
there you have it.
Um, but no, but seriously, like I look at some of these people who are like, "Oh, we need to like know what our kids are learning and we need to know like what these different ideas are and these different books, like we can't be having these books that are talking about these
Oh
things." And I'm
yeah,
just like, the only reason why you would say that you can't do something like that is because you are afraid AF.
yeah,
You are petrified of what might come about,
yeah,
what you might lose, how you have to think about yourself in a new way and rewrite your own story. And that is terrifying for some people.
yeah,
But the fact is that every day we wake up, we learn something new.
yeah,
Every day we wake up, we can ask ourselves questions and say, like, is this true about who I am? Like, how can I take what's happening right now and come to a new understanding about who I am and how the world works? Because the reality is, like, one of the only constants in life is things change.
yeah,
And the
absolutely.
more comfortable we are with accepting and embracing the change of understanding, the changes that come with growing, the changes that come as we age, the better life is, the more enjoyable it is, the more fun it can be. So, like, like, if something new, like this, for example, I feel like this is kind of, I'm going to say an innocuous, uh, kind of conversation, but somebody's probably pissed off about like the idea that Celtic culture is like way more influential than Roman culture. Whatever. That can be your hill. It's not mine. Um, but Marshall's like, what? but um, but if you're uncomfortable with something like that, you need to just sit with the feeling and be like, why am I uncomfortable?
Hmm.
What about this is making me uncomfortable? What is the problem that I'm having? And then answer those questions.
Yeah,
You know,
I
sit with yourself.
I have a cool little personal rule. If it's true, I'm not allowed to be offended. And that's a tough one sometimes because a lot of times people are rude and there's no excuse for rudeness. However,
No.
I can be offended at the rudeness, but the truth of the matter is still the truth of the matter. So let's say somebody says to me, Marshall, you've gained a lot of weight, you're fat. Well, okay, now that's a little rude, right? I can be offended at the rudeness. But I cannot be offended at the truth that, well, yeah, stepping on the scale and comparing to what I used to weigh even just a few years ago, I've gained some weight because I like to eat. And, if I am offended by that reality, then I'm offended at the truth. And once you're offended at the truth, you got big, big problems, you know? So that's kind of my personal rule about that. Now, if a person is respectful and they couch an uncomfortable truth to me in a respectful manner, well, I just have to accept that. And if I don't like that truth, then I need to make changes, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Well, and I mean, like, even if something like the situation that I'm talking about, that technique that I'm talking about sitting with, like, why do you feel that way? I
Hmm.
use that all the time because because people say some shit. Like, they are not, um, they're rude, but also they say all kinds of things because you can say all kinds of things. People say crazy things online, right? And so, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't like this, but
Hmm.
why? Like, why? Why am I feeling uncomfortable? But then the other thing is it true? Is it
Yeah.
real? Is there an aspect of truth here? Is there an aspect of realness? And like, where are the lines and how do I incorporate this into like my new understanding?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
just keep on like playing with that until I get to a place where I'm like, okay, now I'm comfortable. I'm
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well,
And that's like some serious magic.
it's hard. I mean, I'm a white male living on indigenous land, you know, who is undoubtedly the beneficiary of hundreds of years of slavery, oppression, and genocide. Like, there ain't no question about that. And I tell you, that's really uncomfortable. That makes me
It
feel
is.
like every dollar that passes through my hand is dripping with blood. And to some degree, that's true. And,
It is.
and, and the problem I think that really makes me so upset is I didn't choose this. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be born who and as I am. It's just the birth lottery, right? But if I do
That you
ask
know of.
myself, well, would I rather have been born, a person of color? Would I have rather been born as an indigenous person or in another nation or another continent? And I get really uncomfortable with my answer to that because no, I'm happy with who I am and the life I have, which is greatly privileged, and I don't want to exchange it for another life. And then I think, well, what does that say about me as a person and my character? Oh my gosh. And it's really
It's hard.
uncomfortable and it is hard. Um,
Yeah.
but it's a conversation that needs to be had because from that conversation comes empathy, comes understanding that I have somehow lucked into something that I don't deserve, and maybe what I have does not entirely belong to me. Maybe what I have also belongs to others, and I need to share and pass it around and be my brother's keeper to some degree and take care of others. And, there's a lot that I have to do. And the other part is people of color don't need white saviors. So I may do something or help somebody who is a person of color or from a disadvantaged population, but I don't need credit for that, and I should not seek credit for that, nor should I put my name on it. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm not the one helping that person. I'm simply giving what is due to that person, and they're helping themselves with the resources that I've made available to them. And I don't get credit because, frankly, that's the minimum. I don't deserve credit for that. That's the minimum. And having conversations like this with yourself, oh, it's hard. But I think you have to put in that work.
Well, so what you were saying, it just made me think about like when you see a spoiled child.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like so I went to this really privileged, super selective college for a couple of years, which is totally a result of all of that structure that is,
Yeah.
ugh. But I was one of the lower income at that school, which is like that's a bar you could just step over. Because like so many super wealthy and super connected people were at this place. But one of the things that I noticed while I was there is that these people just assume that they can have whatever they want.
Yeah.
And when they do something nice or whatever, they want to be congratulated for it. And it makes me think of like if you're working with a small child,
Hmm.
and they have been given everything that they want, and then they do something nice, they're like, "So aren't you going to say that I'm awesome?" And you're just like, "No, that's not something unusual. That's something that's expected. You need to
Yeah.
just do it." But these are the kinds of conversations that we have to have, and these are the kinds of reframings that we have to have. These are the different stories that we have to have. And one of the most important things that we can do to help us get to those places is by cultivating empathy and cultivating the ability to understand different perspectives and say, like, this perspective has value, and I need to understand what this perspective is. And then I can, like,
Hmm.
have that like little moment where I'm like feeling through my feelings and getting right with whatever is true.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I really think that's the shift that we have to make. That's the good shift. And
Totally.
sometimes it can be hard, right? It's like learning how to drive stick, right? Oh, I have to take my foot off the gas. Now put it on the clutch. But what about the brake? And now I have to shift in the right position without looking. Yeah, it's a lot of work. But I think once you learn how to make that good shift, then I think you'll be better off for it. You'll just have that skill, and who knows what kind of benefits that provides. So I think it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, uh, this is pretty much the end of our time that we set for today. But I do think in the future we'll probably go longer. We did not have any views or audience participation while recording, but that's expected because we told all of like 0 people that we were live. That being said, in the future, yes, we will be promoting this broadcast. And if you have comments for us, please post them here, and we would be very happy to come back and reply to you in the YouTube comments or on Facebook or wherever. And if you have a great question or a great topic, we would love to make that the centerpiece of a future episode. So there you have it. Anything to close with, Alexis?
No, I'm good.
You're good. All right. Well, you've been under the weather, so I hope you get to feeling better. I think you're a real
Thanks.
trooper for getting on and doing this today anyway. And for the rest of you, thank you all, and we'll see you on the next shift.